All right, welcome to the Junk Raider podcast. And today we are talking about what would you do differently if you could go back in time? Davis, if we could go back 6.5 years before we started Junk Raider, right before we started, now that you know, what are some of the things that you would do differently? And feel free to skip all around, right? We don't have to just stick with sales or operations. It's all over the board. But what are those things that you would do differently in hindsight?
The easy answer is, I would have upgraded trucks sooner. I would have gotten better equipment. I would have gone all in. Like, I think all of that stuff is kind of played out. No offense to anybody that's in the past, but I think starting any business, people in hindsight who have been successful in any sort of business, they'd go back and say the same thing. Like, I had just gone after it right out of the gates, put more money into it, blah, blah, more money on capital, sort of stuff. Two things initially come to mind for me. Maybe you think differently on this, but from the jump, we understood the value of Google ads. But like we did, at that time when you don't have much money and you don't know if the service is going to work, you don't know how much demand there is. I think you probably knew just because you've got all the tools on the back end to be like, I know people are searching for this. If we had spent more money, like if in our first month we had put 5 to 10 grand into Google ads, assuming we just had that laying around, we would have had a much different experience right out of the gates. Granted, we probably wouldn't have been able to take on that volume because we didn't have enough personnel and really the truck to do it. Uh, that to me is one thing I probably would have done differently. Is now that obviously in hindsight I know more, at least about how much you spend and the yield at that kind of surface level about marketing. When back then I had zero clue. One. The other thing would be talk about a lot now with just personnel. Like I would have looked for, we had the good fortune of you've got a large circle, and we've pulled from that to get guys integrated into our business, friends, family, colleagues. We've gone out to the market and hired guys like Matt, found off Indeed originally, who have been with us and has no affiliation to the family or whatever. But like I put more emphasis on personnel when we did need to go hire anybody. What is that person that we actually need? And again, this is hindsight. You couldn't know it at that time, at least with lack of experience in this specific industry. Be coupled with that, I would have done a lot more research of people that were running home service businesses and learned from that. And maybe in our first year or two, instead of just kind of taking anybody and everybody that we thought was like a strong person who could work well and, be a good cultural fit, but more emphasis on like, let's take a little bit deeper dive behind the curtain with these people and understand personalities. What do we actually need? What do we have today? And what do we need? Like I don't think we need a bunch of sales guys out in the field. I think we need a few, but we also need other guys that are check the box guys, very routine. I want to make it through the schedule, that have a balance there. And so I think that for me would have put a lot more emphasis on early days is just personnel and figuring out the different types of personalities and skill sets that we need out in the field versus just looking for laborers that we thought, clean backgrounds and could drive a truck. That's where I would start with.
Man, those are all some of the things I wrote down, funny enough. By the way, if you're not already, make sure you like, comment, subscribe, and share if you find value out of this episode. So I wrote down the following. I wrote down sales culture, SEO, our website, and market awareness. So let me start with market awareness because I just had this conversation yesterday with a good friend of mine because he was talking about, I'm sick of the corporate world. I'm sick of the grind. I'm really thinking about getting back into my business for myself. He used to own his own business. And he's like, I'm just trying to decide what business, is it a home service? Like, what should I be doing? So we talked about that. And I said, if I could go back with Junk Raider, which is why I thought this would be a good topic. I said, if I could go back in Junk Raider to right before we started and make some changes, one of the first things I would have done is I would have put even more time. I feel like we did our homework, but not nearly enough in hindsight. I would have researched this local market more. I will say this, when we first started, the market was not nearly as competitive as it is today. I'm a fan of competition. I always have been. I've always felt like, it makes you step up your game. If you're in a competitive environment, that's what makes you better. So don't be afraid of the competition. But I say that to say, if you have an area where you're one of 4 providers, that's very different than you're one of 200 or more. And that's, by the way, when you go and look on Google Maps to find out how many businesses are in my area, that's not all the businesses. Those are the ones that are on Google Maps. Those are the ones that have their Google business page set up. How about the hundreds that don't, if not more? Because how many of them have a presence and they're doing this word of mouth? They're on Craigslist, they're on Marketplace, but they haven't set up a Google business. So that's not actually an accurate number. But I would start with market awareness as my point, is I would understand our market even better to understand what are we going up against? What type of tactics do we want to deploy? What are these guys doing? Really just understanding it better than just here are the big boys. Here's a couple of the local guys, and here's what they charge. That was really my main focus 6.5 years ago. And I think we've grown a lot since then, especially in terms of the market analysis because of the franchise system. We had to really dive in to understand where do we feel like we would do the best in which markets. Number two, sales culture. We've talked about this before, but this is one that you have led the efforts to get us more of a sales culture than just, I would argue, customer service. Our guys have always felt like they are customer service agents much more so than sales reps. And I think you rightfully so came along and said, hey, you know what? I think we need to switch this up. We need to get uncomfortable. We need to get comfortable being uncomfortable. And we need to get more into the mindset of we're salespeople because we are. Whether we like it or not, we are in sales. We are on that customer's property or in their business. And we do have a responsibility to make sure that we're covering our costs. We're not trying to rip someone's head off like we're in used car sales here. But we do need to make sure that we are giving the most accurate price to where we're covering our costs and it's based on volume. Guys, don't be afraid of that. If you're doing everything the right way, there's nothing to be afraid of. There's nothing that you should feel dirty about. Well, I quoted $1,000. Well, if it's $1,000 job, you should have, right? Don't get afraid of those numbers, guys. So I think the sales culture is something that if I could go back, I would have put much more emphasis on making sure that our guys have that awareness at all times, that we don't want you to be high pressure, obnoxious used car salesman, but you are in sales. So embrace it, lean into it, don't fight it. The last thing I'll say is, so as the marketer here, I've always taken that very seriously and always really tried to stay on top of all the new trends, even just in this industry. And I consider myself a marketing nerd, and I'm into all the latest and greatest. I get on there and just geek out about them and just exploit them as much as I can. Once I realize this is a good tool for us or it's not, I move on or decide from there. But I will say one thing I wish I could go back and do a lot differently, really two things, these are related, is number one on the website. I would have spent more time really getting the website better dialed in on the back end, meaning I would have made sure that we had something as simple as having a backup system so that if your primary server goes down, you've got a backup server that's going to take its place so your website's not crashing. We had so many instances where our website crashed in especially the first 3-4 years. We would go down, it seemed like once a quarter at least. And that would be detrimental because our Google ads being attached to that website, it would just shut us down. So now we're relying only on the Google business page, word of mouth, referrals, repeat customers, and SEO to a degree. But that leads me to my last point from an SEO standpoint. I've never been a huge believer in SEO for what we do because it is so impulse driven that the vast majority of customers will go to Google, they'll type in junk removal near me or Charlotte or wherever they live. And whoever pops up first on those paid ads or now LSAs, that's who customers tend to gravitate towards 90+% of the time. However, what I've really experienced the hard way here is what happens when your website is down, what happens when your ads aren't running, what happens when someone comes along and is savvy like you or I that understand the way these ads work. We don't want to get cookied or get retargeted later. So we bypass the paid ads and we go down to the organic because I feel like if it's an organic post that matches my query, they're going to probably be better suited. They're going to be more established, maybe a more reputable business than just a paid ad. Because anyone can do a paid ad, slap the right copy on there, especially today with AI involved. So those are my 4 things. I wish I could go back and do some of those things differently and put more emphasis on those 4 categories. But certainly from a marketing standpoint, from an SEO and a website standpoint, those are the 2 things I would encourage business owners in the home service space, junk removal space specifically, to really understand the value of SEO. No, you're not going to get the same volume of hits. I don't care what anyone tells you. You're not going to get the same volume of hits from SEO versus paid ads. Why? Because paid is always going to be at the top of the page. So you're going to get more volume from it. But not having a strong SEO presence does hurt you. It will hurt you. So Take your time and really put together a good SEO strategy. Make sure it's something that you can stay on top of and feed that machine. Just feed it content on a regular basis. So sales culture, SEO, the website, and more market awareness. Those are the 4 things I would do a better job of.
Things on like quickly on where people go and what they click on these days. Like I think I'm just pulling this out of my butt, but I feel like the buyer is much more savvy. Like you said, you and I, but I think just generally speaking, people, it's kind of like your mom and your grandma are now on Facebook. Like they picked it up, and like my parents jumped on it, however long ago. And I would say if I sat down with them and kind of like watched them scroll, they probably know some like basic stuff there that's like, spend time here. Like, how to go into a group, or like maybe search a keyword in a group, or how to go back and look at an old post. Like, some basic stuff about this app that 5 years ago when you first got into it, this was like a foreign language to you. Same thing with Google, like that same demographic, the older generation, if you will, up on Google, and they likely might bypass those ads too, just because they don't want to get retargeted, or they think they're helping out a local business if they scroll down. Like, I never click on the ads if I'm searching businesses, reasons you mentioned, but also it's like, I don't want them to have to pay for me clicking on this ad when I can just scroll a little bit further and go to the organic. I think buyers have gotten a little bit more savvy into this. Like, this is where you and I, as of recent, have talked a lot about, like, where should we be innovating around marketing or just our digital presence in general? Because the next thing is going to be different in 2, 3, 5 years. Ads may be a distant memory. I don't think it will be, but like as an example, it could be like number 2, 3, 4 down on the channels that people find you. The overwhelming majority may come from TikTok. Not even talking about people searching and finding like cool videos and be like, oh, that guy does junk removal, I need junk removal. People may actually go to these websites to use them as search engines. They go to TikTok and be like, I need junk removal in Charlotte. Who's here? I'll tell you firsthand, I did that with when we were considering buying this home inspectors. I went because I want to see like what you're doing home as a home inspector. It's an industry I have zero knowledge on. I can see a guy got a decent amount of videos, like how he walks through a home, how he talks about the home. You'll get a pretty quick idea of whether or not he knows what he's doing or not. At least that gives me some comfort of being like, I'm going to pay this guy $500 to go inspect this home for me, versus just going with someone random off Google. So just as a note there, I think you always have to be figuring out where the next play is, where's the buyer in terms of how they're searching and finding your service. Major point I would say is I don't think you or I had any sort of major life or professional event happening back in 2018 that made us take a different approach to Junk Raider when we started it. We kind of started it because we knew we wanted to do something on our own, and let's just see how this goes. There's other people who maybe just got fired from corporate America, or fired from wherever it is, fired from their last job, or they're so sick of it they just quit on a whim. They had a relative get really, really sick and they have to go take care of them, but they also need income and they can't have like a normal job because of it. A million different reasons. Somebody may be like, I got to start a business. I need something now. What can I do? Urgency kind of, and that you and I just kind of dipped our toe in, but we did kind of dip our toe in the early days just to see if this thing works, because junk removal was not as prevalent as it is now. You go on Google, on YouTube, you'll see all sorts of videos about people talking about not just junk removal, but just trash in general, valet trash, management, renting out dumpsters. Like, it's hot now. It's in home services is even hotter. You and I didn't have the luxury of having this massive audience around the country that could legitimize our thoughts that we could start a junk removal company and be successful at it, because we didn't know if the industry existed. Like, we knew 1-800 got junk existed, and you could trace them back to 1989 and be like, oh, well, if they have been around for so long, there's clearly a need. Like, we didn't have anything going for us negatively that was like, well, this has to work. It was more like, let's see if it works. And it did. And you and I kind of started to pick up the steam. But even in those first couple of years, I would say our mindset wasn't necessarily all in on like, this is it. This is our foundation of what we're going to grow from. And that's another point that I wanted to mention, was just like, personally, I would have urged the two of us in every single conversation we had, stay more focused on junk removal. Like, you and I considered a lot of stuff in the early days, including demo, to the degree where we actually went out and bought a Bobcat. We even chatted about like stump grinding back in the day. We even did like 2 pressure washing jobs.
Mm-hmm.
being, of course, rentals. Like we about all these things, and I would have, again, hindsight, gone back and stayed a lot more focused. Approval. But again, at that time, we had no clue how proven or not proven the market was, what real revenue potential was in it, like we do now. So those are a few things I would say. The last one I guess I would touch on would just be outbound sales. I think the end of the digital aspect that we just talked about, like you have to exist there and you have to continue to stay on top of that every single day, like what you do. Make sure that our Google ads are populating, make sure our organic search results were populating on the first page, make sure our GMB is good. Put like I always done outbound sales for Junk Raider, but I would have done a lot of it in those early days, like a ground approach, like actually get out and do some drop-ins, really, the leads that we did get from corporate customers, like actually lean into those hard and ask for referrals and be like, all right, did a storage unit clean out for this company up in Mooresville? You have to have more properties around the area. Where are they? Who owns them? Who manages them? So I would have done a lot more outbound sales, I think, in the early days, kind of like, the emphasis that we put on that now. There's just a few more things I mentioned.
Yeah. Well, I think what's important is that, and if you've made it to the end of this video where we're wrapping up, hopefully if you're just starting off, you've gotten some really good stuff out of it. If maybe you're in the same boat we are, you're into your journey and you've had success, leave us some comments. Let us know what are some of the things you would do differently. But I think what's most important and why I love this topic is it's important that you're just aware. You're staying aware of your business. If you're at a place where you're able to put people in to really run the business and they're doing a great job, look, that's the holy grail. That's the dream I think we're all chasing, is to get to the place where your business is so successful. Hopefully you've got either multiple locations or maybe you just have one, but you're killing it and you can bring really good people on board to do what you do, right? That should be the goal so that you can move on to do other things, whether that's time with your family or whether that's growing other businesses, starting new locations, starting a franchise, whatever that is. The last thing I would say is, and you just touched on it, is make sure you're not doing too much, right? When you're first getting started, I would say, especially your first few years, less is more. That is absolutely true. We've learned that. So you mentioned stump grinding, pressure washing, and we know this is a trap that's very common in the junk removal space. As a lot of junk removal business owners start looking at their business going, well, man, you know what? This makes sense. This makes sense. It's all in the same vein of waste management or cleaning. So maybe I could bolt on pressure washing to my business. Maybe I could start doing gutter cleaning or hanging Christmas lights. It's like the list goes on and on of all the shiny new toys you could chase. But that's one of the other ones, is if I could do it all over again, I would have just said, hey, let's really focus. And you would have needed to tell me that far more than I would tell you, because obviously I'm ADD and you keep me grounded. Make sure you're not chasing too many butterflies, right? If you're a home service business owner and you're just starting off, especially, focus. What is your primary business? Focus. Get that business so dialed in, so perfected that you could go to a new location if you wanted, and it's not a distraction. It's not going to hurt you. If that is really the lens that you're looking at your business through, you're going to be okay. But if you make some of those mistakes where you try to bite off more than you can chew, like this business is not debt free, and yet now you're starting a new division of this business, you're starting on a whole new project, you're starting software, or you're opening a new business over here. Those are things that can and will hurt you, unless you come into this with a ton of money that you can burn through and make mistakes, because that's what's going to happen. It does take money to make money, but one way that you can mitigate all that is by not biting off more than you can chew. So that's the last thing I would say, is make sure that you're staying focused on your core business, learn it better than anyone, become a master in that business. Then you can start looking at other items on the menu.
I would say that I think is fairly important that I've realized last year or two. Don't be afraid to like go and look at who's been in the space for a long time and emulate some of the things they're doing. I think in the early days, maybe we saw 1-800-GOT-JUNK and we knew the gorilla in the space. They are really high priced. Do all their quotes on site. Like you and I were very stuck in like, we're different. Like we're going to innovate and be so different. We're giving pricing out over the phone. We're going to have available on our website. We're not going to be so expensive. Some of those things are still true today, but like what I've grown to realize, and I've grown to really admire a company like 1-800 and anybody else. To your point, I like competition because they're light years beyond where we are, which keeps us sharp, should keep us sharp, and also chasing and innovating to hopefully get to some sort of level of success that they've realized. It's important to to understand that it's okay to sometimes mimic others in your direct industry. I'm not talking like, oh, go mimic like Apple. Like they don't provide discounts at all because they believe so much in their pricing. Like, yeah, that's cool. But like I'm saying, if you think 1-800-GOT-JUNK is successful in an area, like they only do on-site quotes, or they have offshored their call center, or they use this type of software over this one, you should really take a good look at why they do that. Just generally speaking about life, I do this to people all the time. Like usually a reason why today people use or provide a service the way in which they do. Usually that reason is because it's the best one. It's the best way to do it. Ways, and that doesn't mean like you can't innovate on top of it and make things better. People do that all the time. The crux of it is like VOA also make it a point to go and look at your competition, the ones that have been around for a while and look like they're successful, and see what they're doing. If it makes sense for your business to implement that exact same thing, maybe make some tweaks. Also, but basically mimic but innovate at the same time. I would say, like I think we lost do a lot of that in the early days. I know, because maybe call it pride or just ignorance or whatever. That I today, like I look at body, especially the big boys in our industry. I'm like, what are they doing? Can we do that? Does it make sense for our business? We're in two different pieces. Might have a lot more access to capital and funds to go do some things, but on a small scale, you can still do a lot of the stuff that they're doing. Where I think some of the things that you touched on with like outbound sales culture, customer interaction look like with the guys in the field, we didn't change much of that until recently, when we realized, hey, there's some good stuff here that these other companies are doing that we're not doing that would probably help us. So last thing I would say.
Yeah. Well, hopefully, if you're watching, you got value out of this. And again, if you have anything to share, some things you would do differently, maybe you disagree with something, feel free to leave that in the comment section below. That may be a topic for an upcoming episode, in fact. So until next time, we'll see you.